Namaskar and welcome to this lecture on principles of construction management. Now, in the last discussion that we had gone through the stages in a project comprising of the concept, which would essentially also have a requirement. That means, there is already a requirement and the client knows the tentative location of that project. A basic survey has been carried out to address the applicable bylaws, constraints, soil conditions and so on. So, if these things have been carried out at the concept stage itself, it makes things a lot easier as far as the project is concerned. So, from the concept we move to a more detailed plan, followed by structural and other design steps. These design steps are followed by an execution phase, where a contractor or another agency actually carries out that project, followed by the operation of that project, during which we are mostly concerned with the maintenance and operation of that, and finally the decommissioning. So, as far as this particular course is concerned, I have already emphasized that we are primarily dealing with these aspects, from concept to planning to design and execution. More specifically, we will deal with design and execution as we go along. Now, before we get into that discussion, in this lecture today, we will go through some of the major steps in the execution of a project and also cover some of the basic definitions that we will use as we go along in this course. Now, coming to the first step, which is the concept. From there we move on to the preliminary estimate of the project. This exercise the client or the owner carries out to have some understanding of how much, as a ballpark figure, how much would the project cost, whether it is going to cost 1 million or 10 million or 100 million and so on. We must remember that we are not dealing with individual finances, we are dealing with institutional finances which require approvals, which require the proper kind of paperwork which has to be supporting a particular expenditure. So, here is a preliminary estimate which need not be very accurate, but if it is accurate it is good, but it need not be very accurate. Please also remember that even to prepare a preliminary estimate, the client has to invest a certain amount of manpower. There is a certain amount of investment in terms of manpower, in terms of resources to prepare the preliminary estimate, and that is what we talked about earlier in this discussion today. That is the investment that is required to do the very rough layout plan, figure out the need and so on. So, once the preliminary estimate is ready, we take an administrative approval and financial sanction. So, we go to whatever the authority or the body be, that okay, this is the project that we would like to execute, kindly approve this project. So, depending on the kind of discussion that happens at that stage, the project is, let us say, approved. Now, once that approval is obtained, additional investment is carried out by the client in more detailed planning and more detailed design, which could include the structural design, the functional design, good for construction drawings and so on and so forth. We have not covered, or we do not really need to go into the details as to whether an architect will be involved or an architect will not be involved, as to which is the agency which will actually carry out the preliminary estimate or the detailed estimate and so on. Leaving those things apart, once we have the detailed design, we go ahead and calculate or carry out the detailed estimate. That gives us the actual amount of funds that are likely to be involved as far as the construction of that project is concerned. Then we go back and obtain a final approval and technical sanction. Please remember that it is a matter of terminology. We are calling it financial sanction here, we are calling it technical sanction here, we are calling it a final approval here, we are calling it an administrative approval here and so on. But those are matters of detail and we really do not have to bother so much about what terminology is used and so on. The idea basically is that initially there is a preliminary estimate, then there is a detailed estimate, and before we go to the site, we need to have a final approval from someone who says, yes, we can go ahead and execute the project. Till such time as we have reached this stage, the project is still on the drawing board alone. This does not mean that all the details of the project have been worked out before the execution starts. There may be some details which are left out, but the detailing should have already reached a stage wherein a very accurate estimate can still be made. So, having come this far, we finally go to the stage where we try to say, okay, now let us try to look for an agency to execute the job. And this exercise is carried out through what is called, or what I have called here, a notice inviting tender, an NIT. Now, before we proceed further, I would like to make some comments. One of them is that we must remember that these procedures have been designed, or they are being discussed, because we need to have transparency in processes to make sure that the funds are being used appropriately and effectively. Like I said at the beginning of the discussion today, we are dealing with institutional funds. If it's a government project, we are dealing with public funds. So, there is an accountability and there is a responsibility which is very important, and the processes have to ensure transparency. The procedures should also be such that the responsibility and accountability can be appropriately fixed at even a subsequent point in time. What this means is that even after the project has been executed, should there be a doubt as to whether the right kind of procedures were followed or not, there should be a trail of documents, approvals and so on, which would be able to establish as to what were the different steps that were taken. I must also share with you the fact that the details being discussed in these lectures are by nature of a general discussion, and different organizations could have their own specific procedures and their terminologies. At times, the discussion here could be largely theoretical to the extent that it is not really practiced in the industry. We will talk of processes which could be ideal. We may allude to them in that form or not, but we must remember that it is not a single process which is practiced across the construction industry. Different organizations, whether it is the railways or whether it is the roads, they have their own processes. Different countries have their own processes by which these projects are executed. Now, having said that, let us look at a few simple definitions. What exactly is a tender in the construction industry? This really is a written offer to execute a specified work within a certain time under certain conditions of contract between the contractor and the client for a certain amount of money. So, we have a client and we have a contractor, and what binds them together is a contract. And this contract basically says that the contractor agrees to create a certain service or a certain structure or whatever it is, and the client agrees to compensate the contractor with a certain amount of money. So, now this pair is what is given in the contract. So, the tender is basically a written document which is not a contract, of course. It is a written statement submitted by the bidder as such, saying that okay, for this work under these conditions, this is what it is going to cost. So, we will see these details more closely later on. Now, let us try to look at what is a notice inviting tender. As we saw in a previous slide, this is the stage when the client is ready to go public with an announcement that, well, this is a project which we would like to see executed. So, a notice inviting tender is a public document announcing a work and inviting interested parties to submit their bids. The details of the conditions of the work are also either indicated or the method of obtaining them is given. So, this is where we really need to have completed all our detailed design and everything, so that any interested bidder can either look at that document, or there is a place, it could be a website, it could be a link or whatever it is, he could go there and obtain the details of the work and the conditions under which it has to be carried out. Then, depending upon the scale or the estimated cost, the level of circulation could be different. Now, what this means is that depending on the estimated cost of the tender or estimated cost of the work, and that estimated cost is not the preliminary estimate, it is basically based on the detailed estimate, that is the final estimate that we worked out at the end of our planning and design exercise. Based on that cost, what should be the level of circulation? The level of circulation means that whether we should publish it locally at the client's website and leave it at that, or we should make extra efforts to publicize the fact that there is a work available. The lowest form of execution is word of mouth. We just inform some people and let it be. The most public form of circulation is a global tender, where we try to invite people from across the world to bid for a project. We must remember that circulation also involves funds, and therefore one has to decide that, okay, for a 1 million project, this is the level of circulation that we will do. For a 10 million project, this is what we will do, and for 100 million, this is what we will do, and so on. So that is where different departments, different institutions, different organizations may have their own standards and methods of circulation. Now, what does the notice inviting tender or the NIT contain? It contains the name of the client inviting tender. It also contains pre-qualifications, if any. It might say that, well, for this job, we are looking for a contractor who's already registered with us. So there is a procedure by which different organizations have pre-registered contractors, and we have to declare that in this. What is the nature of the work? Whether it primarily involves construction of a house, or it involves primarily civil work or electrical work or whatever it is. What is the estimated cost? What is the likely or the desired time of completion? What are the conditions while undertaking the contract or the job? This typically is given in 2 volumes. One is a general conditions of contract, which is called the GCC, and the other is the special conditions of contract, which is the SCC. Then there are details of the earnest money deposit, the EMD, and the details of the security deposit and the performance guarantee. It also contains the last date, in fact specifically the time for submission of a tender document, and finally it gives the date, time and place for opening of the tender. Once we look at these details, it becomes obvious that the nature of the work and the estimated cost, the time of completion, these details are important for a bidder to decide whether or not they are interested in submitting a bid for that project or not. For example, certain large contractors may not be very interested in very small jobs. Maybe the other way around, very small contractors who have not handled a large project before would not like to bid for a certain job. So this nature of job, the estimated cost and the time of completion gives an idea to the bidder whether or not they should bid for a job or not. As an assignment, I would like you to read the general conditions of contract and the special conditions of contract, which we will probably try to share with you, but please do read them on your own, and that will give you an idea as to what is contained therein and why they are called general conditions and special conditions. So this is a home assignment which I am leaving for you. It is more like a food for thought. Obviously, there is no answer or there is no solution to it. Possibly at some point in time in the course we will discuss it. Now, here is an example of a notice inviting tender, except that as you can see here, it is an e-tender notice. It is not a notice which has been published in newspapers and so on. It is for e-tendering. Now, let me read this so that we see as to how this particular example covers the kind of things that we talked about in the last slide. It says that the executive engineer IWD IIT Kanpur on behalf of the Board of Governors of IIT Kanpur invites online item rate tenders from empaneled contractors of IIT Kanpur for the following electrical work. So it says that who is the agency which is calling the tender? It is the works department of the institute. The fact that they are doing it on behalf of the Board of Governors of IIT Kanpur is a administrative input. We don't have to really take so much of cognizance of it. It's an online item rate tender. Now there are different types of tenders and this is one of them. In fact, as far as this course is concerned, we will stick to this type of tenders because I would think that if we understand this model of tenders, the others are easier to follow. From empaneled contractors. Now here is where the pre-qualification is, that the contractor who bids for this project should already be an empaneled contractor. The institute, in this case IIT Kanpur, the organization, they have an exercise or they carry out an exercise periodically of empaneling contractors, and that exercise precedes this. So once the contractors have been empaneled, they are free to bid for projects as they come along. The electrical work. So there is the nature of work which is declared here, but more specifically it is given here. It says construction of rooms in open yard of environmental engineering lab, Western lab and so on. So this is the exact location of the work, so that it makes it easier for any prospective bidder to go to the site if they need to or if they want to and see where exactly it will be located. This helps the contractors or the bidders at this stage decide what will be the nature of difficulties in executing the work at that location and so on, whether it is accessible, how far is it from the road, how will the material be taken there, because all these things have a cost implication. It gives the estimated cost. In this case it is 411,520 rupees and so on. Then it talks of an earnest money, which we will talk about later. The period of completion is given here as 3 months. The last date and time for submission of the tender is given as some date and time, and period during which the EMD cost of tender document, e-tender processing fees and other documents shall be submitted is given here. So remember that this is an e-tender, which means that the tender will have to be submitted online, but the client, which in this case is IIT Kanpur, needs to have certain physical documents which have to be submitted to the institute by the regular post, and this is the deadline for those documents to be received. The time and date for opening of tender is given here. This is the date and this is the time, and it says that the e-tender document is available at this particular site. So once a bidder goes to this site, this gives us or gives the bidder all the details relating to this particular project, which is going to cost 411,520 rupees as an estimate as prepared by the institute. This estimate is obviously not the same as what the bidder may agree to do it or not agree to do it, and so on and so forth. Now coming to some definitions, I would like to talk to you about earnest money deposit, performance guarantee and security deposit. Please understand that there is a terminology issue involved and one can understand it any which way you want. Having said that, let us try to talk about, as far as the earnest money deposit is concerned, at the time of bidding, a contractor deposits this amount, that is the earnest money deposit, which is kept at say 2% of the cost put to tender. So now it is important to note that this is 2% of the cost put to tender with the client as a guarantee of the earnestness of the bid. So basically in the NIT which the client invites or which the client puts out, saying that okay, here is a project which we want to do, please come forward and let us know your terms and conditions in terms of financial conditions and so on. In order to avoid frivolous bidding, that is by contractors who are not really serious about applying for that particular job, there is this earnest money deposit involved, which is a guarantee of the earnestness of the bidder, and it is kept at say 2% of the cost put to tender, because that is the only cost that at that time is known. That is the cost that the client has estimated will be the cost of the project. The EMD of the bidders, other than the successful ones, is returned after the bid has been opened. Obviously, there can be more than one bidder and only one will be successful. There may be conditions in which you may like to keep another bidder on your waiting list or something, provided that is allowed by the conditions that you are operating under. Now, if that is the case, at least for the others who are not successful, who are not in the race for doing that project, their EMD needs to be returned after the project bids have been opened. Now, as far as the forfeiture is concerned, it's also possible that the EMD may be forfeited by the client, that is, it is not paid back to the bidder under the condition that the bidder wants to withdraw the bid after opening of the bid. Now, that may happen even for a successful bidder. The guy may be the lowest bidder or whatever it is and decides not to pursue that bid. In that case, at least the EMD will be forfeited or may be forfeited. One must understand that at the end of it, in processing the bids, the client puts in a certain amount of resources. It costs the client a certain amount of money to process the bids. Now, if all the EMD is to be returned, then it becomes a completely losing proposition, and not that the client wants to make money out of it, but at least as a deterrence for people trying to get a project and getting out of it, the provision is there for forfeiture of the EMD. For the successful bidder, there is an LOI. Now, what is an LOI? Letter of intent. So, the client issues a letter of intent and asks the successful bidder to furnish a performance guarantee, which is now related to the actual amount of the award, because here we are talking of cost put to tender because there was nothing else available to us. But after the bids have been opened, the client knows that okay, this bidder has bid at a certain cost. Now, related to that cost, the bidder is asked to furnish a performance guarantee before an agreement is signed. Now, how much is that performance guarantee? Again, depends on organization to organization and the system in which you're working. It could be 5%, it could be 7%, whatever that number is. Now, whether this successful bidder furnishes a fresh or a totally fresh performance guarantee, or he says that look, you already have a certain amount of EMD from me which is available with you, and kindly treat that as part of my performance guarantee, and here is a document which gives you the remaining amount. That would depend on what is the validity of these different documents. At the end of it, whether it is EMD or it is the performance guarantee or whatever it is, there is a certain amount of validity involved. The document clearly says that this earnest money deposit, whether it's a bank guarantee or a term deposit, it is valid only till a certain date. Now, typically, the EMD, till what time will it be valid? It will be valid only till the time of, so the EMD will be valid only up to, let's say, the opening of the tender. It need not be valid for too long after that. Whereas, the performance guarantee needs to be valid till at least the end of the project. It's not really the end of the project, but it is end of the project plus a small time beyond that, let's say 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is. So, keeping the validity in mind, the bidder might furnish a fresh performance guarantee altogether, or might extend the validity of his EMD and furnish performance guarantee for the balance funds. Recapitulating this, the letter of intent and performance guarantee. Through the NIT, the client has identified the agency to whom the work is to be awarded and issues a letter of intent, LOI, asking that bidder to deposit a performance guarantee, which could be 5% of the award value, and mobilize and commence work. The date of commencement is defined in the LOI, and once these conditions are met, we go to the signing of the agreement. So this agreement then becomes the Bible as far as the contractor and the client is concerned in proceeding with the works. This performance guarantee is released after the issue of the completion certificate by the client if the performance in terms of time, safety, etc. during the execution is found satisfactory. So now, why do we need a performance guarantee? We need a performance guarantee not, at least as far as this definition that we are talking about here is concerned, not in terms of the performance of the project that will be constructed. It is in terms of the performance of the contractor. So the contractor, by depositing the performance guarantee with the client, basically makes a statement that here is some funds available with you, which is against the possibility of the contractor not doing the job satisfactorily and so on. So obviously the performance guarantee in that sense is not required once the project has been completed. So once the project has been completed and the completion certificate has been issued by the client, then this performance guarantee can be returned to the bidder. Now coming to the third term that we talked about, that is the security deposit. Now this security deposit is the deposit or the pool of money or the funds which is available with the client to ensure that the project has been completed satisfactorily in terms of performance. Now, security deposit is the deposit with the client for any repair of the work during the defect liability period, if the contractor fails to rectify the defect. Typically, all construction projects include a defect liability period. That is a period beyond the completion of the project during which the contractor undertakes to carry out any repair work or rectification should that be required, and in case the contractor does not carry them out, the client uses the security deposit which is available to the client to carry it out, and that amount is debited or taken out of the security deposit. How is this fund created? The client creates this fund, that is the security deposit, by deducting, let's say 10% from each running account bill. Now this running account bill business we'll talk about later in subsequent lectures. There may be an upper limit on the amount to be retained in this form, which could be say 5% of the project cost. So let's take an example and discuss this. Suppose we had a cost put to tender was 90 crores. Against that, an EMD will be required which is related to this. Suppose instead of 90 crores, the work is awarded at 100 crores, we will have a performance guarantee which will be related to this amount made available to the client. And then as this work of 100 crores is being carried out over a certain period of time, there will be certain running account bills that will be raised. Now depending on the running account bill which is raised here, here, here and so on, let's say at this point the running account bill of 20 crores is raised, here it's another 20 crores, another 20 crores. What the client does is that out of this 20 crores retains 10%, that is 2 crores here, 2 crores here and so on and so forth, creating a pool of funds which will be available for repair. Now one may have a cap on this amount. For example, if I say that okay, it's 5% of the project cost, then instead of this 2 here, this will become only 1 and no deductions need be made here, because at this point already the 5 crore limit has been reached. Now, these are all operational details which are all very well laid out in contract documents, and I am giving you only as a illustrative example. So, it's easy to understand now that at any point during the project, the client has access to the performance guarantee, which is already available with him, which is coming from here, and a certain amount of the security deposit. At the end of the project, when the performance guarantee is to be returned to the contractor, I am not using the word bidder here, because at this point obviously the bidder has become the contractor, has completed that project. So, the performance guarantee has to be released, and only the security deposit is then retained till the end of the defect liability period. And that's what's written here. The security deposit is refunded after the defect liability period has lapsed and no defect is pending for rectification. So, how much should be the defect liability period, whether it should be 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, is an open question, and we'll talk about it several times in this course. Now, let me talk a little bit about the evaluation of bids and identifications of a contractor. Now, the bids may be evaluated on the basis of lowest cost alone. So, at the end of it we can say that okay, here is a project, 5 people bid for it, and depending on whosoever is the lowest bidder, we award the job to that person and issue him what is called the letter of intent. That is what you were talking about in the last slide. Having said that, though we can award the job to the person or the bidder with the lowest bid, we must make sure that the bidder is technically competent, financially sound, and so on. So, this has to be ensured through an examination of technical competence, financial soundness, safety record, and so on. So, all this is part of the evaluation process that goes on. Of course, we can award the job to the bidder with the lowest bid, but we must make sure that the person is technically competent, financially sound, has the right kind of a safety record, and so on. So, all this has to be a part of the evaluation process. So, now either we do that on a case to case basis for each of the contracts that we award, or it can be done through a process of empanelment. So, this empanelment exactly is the kind of thing which we referred to earlier, that the client invites people or invites bidders to submit their documents, so that for a period of time, that is the validity of the empanelment, for that period different bidders, they submit documents which establishes their competence. Now, once that is done, then we can indeed go for the lowest bid, else it has to be submission of appropriate documents. With each bid, the people have to submit their proofs of technical competence, financial soundness, and so on. Now, apart from the lowest cost system, we can have a system where bids are invited in 2 parts, technical and financial, which are opened separately. Now, the technical bid does not contain any financial details, and obviously that gives only information about the technical competence. It could include financial soundness and so on, everything, other than how much it is going to cost for that particular project, or how much is the money which the bidder is going to take from the client for that particular project. So, once we have this so called 2 bid system, initially we carry out what is called the technical evaluation, and then having carried out the technical evaluation, we open the financial bids. So, typically technical bids are opened first, and after a certain amount of time, then the financial bids are opened. Financial bids are usually opened for only those bidders which qualify technically. It makes no sense for us to even know what was the bid of a bidder who does not have the technical competence. So, those bids are summarily returned and rejected. So, only those bidders whose technical bids are found in order, their financial bids are opened. Now, in this process now, evaluation can be based on only the cost for the technically qualified bidders, or it could be based on a composite score based on evaluation of technical and financial bids. In the next class, we will go through an example where this concept is going to be more clearly explained, but right now it suffices to say that what I am calling A here basically says that for all bidders who qualify technically, it is only the cost that is going to decide the winner, or it is the cost alone that is going to decide to whom the project will be awarded. Whereas in B, that is not the case, and the score on the technical competence will also have a certain weightage when we carry out the final evaluation. So, this is going to become clearer once we do an example next time. So, to recapitulate, what we have done today is we have gone through the notice inviting tender, whatever the details it should contain and so on. We have gone and studied the evaluation of bids based on the bidding criteria. We have gone on the award of jobs, signing of contract, the issue of the LOI and so on, and starting the construction work. Now, before the construction starts, once we ask the contractor to mobilize, we also have the provision of a mobilization advance, which the contractor can ask in order to be able to mobilize or in order to facilitate his mobilization. Now, let me quickly explain what I have written here. We must be very careful with document verification in terms of past record, financial details and so on before we sign the contract or issue the letter of intent. Similarly, the mobilization advance is given to the contractor by the client to initiate construction activities at site. It is recovered from running account bills, and we must make sure that no advance is given without a supporting guarantee. The guarantee could be in form of a bank guarantee or whatever it is, but it should not be unsecured. And before we close the discussion for today, let me also go through another very important aspect, that is, construction projects may go on for long periods of time and involve substantial commitment of resources. Therefore, the contractor will need to be paid periodically for the parts of the work that are completed. Now, this is ensured by what is called running account bills, and that is something which we had talked about earlier in the discussion today. Also, because of this long duration of construction projects, there is often a provision for escalation in agreed prices, and also critical items such as steel or cement could be made available by the client at a fixed rate with some conditions. Now, what this kind of a provision does is to protect the contractor from fluctuations in cost of critical items. That is why the client takes that risk and says that, well, that part of the risk in fluctuation of prices in steel or cement, also perhaps to ensure a certain quality, that material supply is included as part of the client supply. And finally, there are different types of contracts. It could be a lump sum contract or a turnkey contract, an item rate contract, or a build, own, operate and transfer contract, or an engineering, procurement and construction contract. And as far as we are concerned, we would largely concentrate on the item rate contract as far as our discussion in this module is concerned. But having said that, I would like you to find out more about these types of contracts, and it will help if you have a specific simple project in mind. If you just think that, okay, let us talk of a road from point A to point B. If this is the project that is being tendered for and people are bidding for it, how will these different models or how will these different types of contracts be applied to that project? That is a food for thought for you, and also list some examples of each of the above contracts from information available to you on the internet and so on. With this, we come to an end of our discussion today. These are some of the books which will help you better understand the material that we have covered today. Thank you.